US President Joe Biden blames Vladimir Putin for the highest inflation in the US in more than 4 decades, while a US senator says it's the Biden administration itself that can't handle the crisis.
We went out and closed the door, and in that moment there was an explosion. Just 1 minute later, and our lives would have been so different.
19 civilians die and dozens are wounded in Donbass in the latest Ukrainian army shelling. That's according to local authorities. And China claims a US arms package to Taiwan undermines peace in the region and threatens all-out war if the island declares independence. From Moscow to the world, this is RT International. I'm Peter Scott, and these are the top stories this hour. With US consumer inflation hitting its highest level in more than 4 decades, an 8.6% increase, President Biden has once again blamed Vladimir Putin for a surge in energy and food costs that's currently rocking America.
Today's inflation report confirmed what Americans already know. Putin's price hike is hitting America hard. Gas prices at the pump, energy and food prices account for half of the monthly price increases since May. My administration is going to continue everything we can to lower the prices to the American people, and the Congress has to act, and they have been of late.
Biden's comments come despite US inflation rising sharply since his term began in January 2021, soaring from an average of 1.4% in December 2020 to 7% in December 2021. That's 2 months before the war in Ukraine began. And despite Biden touting his office's efforts to deal with the problem, US Senator John Kennedy says it looks like the administration has simply given up.
It's destroying the American dream. And we have to address it. And it looks to me like the Biden administration has just given up.
Biden's comments come as liquefied natural gas prices also skyrocket in the EU. That's after an explosion at an export terminal over in Texas, which had been sending the fuel to Europe. But prices for the fuel in the US have actually gone down since then, as more of the LNG is now expected to be used domestically instead of going abroad. Earlier, Washington said it would help Europe to reduce its dependence on Russian gas imports. The Texas plant shutdown will cut its output by around 8%, which could further threaten Europe's energy security. Most of the fuel from that terminal had been shipped to the EU. Our US correspondent Caleb Morpin picks up the story.
Well, it was in Freeport, Texas. Residents heard 3 very loud bangs. And essentially what they were hearing was a liquefied natural gas terminal exploding. Now, this explosion has been widely decried as an indicator of a possible threat to public health, the fumes, but it's also going to have a pretty big impact on the international markets. We've heard analysis about the ability of the United States to import and export natural gas, about the crisis and the rising costs. Here's some of what we've heard in the aftermath of this dramatic explosion in Texas.
This is going to take supply out of the market when it's badly needed. We were already moving into a very precarious set of market dynamics.
This is going to tighten prompt supply, particularly in the Atlantic, as a majority of the cargoes have been destined for Europe.
So it's important to note that as a result of this explosion, the LNG hub in Freeport, Texas is going to be shut down for 3 weeks. 3 weeks it will not be operating in the aftermath of this rather large explosion. In addition to that, 20% of all U.S. natural gas exports are going to be affected by the explosion that took place and the shutting down of the hub. In addition to that, it's also important to point out that 75% of U.S. natural gas exports have been going to Europe. Now, there has been some relief for domestic natural gas purchasers in the United States because of the fact that Biden instituted some action and basically required domestic producers to give priority to the U.S. market before exporting. That resulted in prices going down in the United States, but it had a negative effect on the international markets and basically forced the European markets to pick up the burden. And now we have a situation where we have countries in the EU saying they want to completely go off of Russian gas. They want to completely shut down Russian gas. But now, as the aftermath of this explosion is showing, their confidence in American markets and the ability of the United States to supply gas to Europe is a little bit shaken. Europe is seeing a rise in its natural gas prices. And at this point, the ability of Europe to import natural gas from the United States is at this point in a little bit of question. Now, this explosion and the impact it's having on the global markets seems to fly in the face of a lot of what Joe Biden and other U.S. leaders have said over the past few months, reassuring everyone that America has enough gas to supply the world.
We're moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us. The United States produces far more oil domestically than all the European countries combined. In fact, we're a net exporter of energy. So we can take this step when others cannot. But we're working closely with Europe and our partners to develop a long-term strategy to reduce their dependence on Russian energy as well. First of all, we are looking at opportunities to make up for lost gas, LNG, from Russia. We're underway of trying to see what we can do to do that, dealing with our friends around the world as well. We think we could make up a significant portion of it.
Now, if the situation is really as dark as some of the pessimistic forecasts we're currently seeing from analysts, then this will be a major blow to the ability of Europe to import natural gas from the United States. People look at what was done by Finland and that recent 10-year contract that they signed in order to wean off of Russian gas and import American gas for the next 10 years. People are wondering if that decision made by Finland was a bit too hasty.
And while intense fighting continues on the front lines of the Donbass region, Donetsk and Lugansk officials accuse the Ukrainian army of shelling residential areas of cities across the republics. 19 civilians died and 23 have been wounded as a result of the latest shelling of a number of Donetsk and Lugansk cities. That is according to local authorities. Donbass forces claim that Kiev is using Western-made heavy weapons in those attacks. We spoke to some locals who witnessed the shelling.
I was sitting near the window. The balcony door was ajar. There was a bang on the wall, and part of the balcony collapsed. Just one room was damaged. Everyone else stayed intact. I've heard one explosion today, but continuous shooting. I was scared. But even though they were shooting all day, I didn't think I'd be hit.
A projectile flew into the hall and then flew out and into the bedroom. We went out and closed the door, and in that moment there was an explosion. Just 1 minute later, and our lives would have been so different. Just 1 minute. And as for our child, yes, our baby is just 3 years old.
Meanwhile, in the Donetsk port city of Mariupol, which was recently taken by Russian forces and their allies, reconstruction is underway. We spoke to Russian emergency services personnel who are currently working in the city.
We started work in the city immediately after the end of the hostilities. As Russian and Donetsk emergency services began to perform their duties, the city gradually began to come back to life. We also have a large group of sappers who defuse mined buildings. Ukrainian troops mined everything here as they were retreated.
This is a school building. It is almost completely destroyed. A group of Ukrainian military were here. We found equipment, personal belongings, weapons, and a case from a night vision device.
On Sunday, RT's documentary on the siege of Mariupol will be released, and in it, witnesses share some of their harrowing experiences that took place during that siege. Here's a quick teaser.
Они нас обстреляли. И Азов, как сказал, мы Мариуполь в руинах оставим, оно так и получилось. Они пообещали свое слово. Это нацисты, они до этого нас 8 лет мучили.
Начали выезжать колонна из 2 машин. Первые 2 машины нашу и еще другую. Просто без предупреждения. На гостинице «Азовсталь» расстреляли снайперы. Показательно попали в дочь, 2 ноги прострелили маме.
Не выпускали, нас стреляли с этих никаких снайперов, нас из подъезда не выпускали, ни в подъезд.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised London's assistance to Kiev during the Ukrainian war. That's as British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace arrived in the capital to discuss the urgent needs of Ukraine's troops. And during that trip, Zelensky once again emphasised the importance of the West supplying heavy weapons.
Ukrainian troops are doing everything they can. Using the artillery, they have to stop the occupiers' offensive, well as much as the heavy weapons and modern artillery. All that we have asked and continue to ask our partners to provide, allow them to. I have met the UK's Secretary of State for Defence Ben Wallace. We discussed how to stop Russian aggression and how to stop it mounting a potential offence and what supplies are needed for our army. The British showed true leadership in defence matters.
Britain's now confirmed the donation of long-range multiple rocket systems. That's in addition to the thousands of anti-tank missiles, armoured vehicles and air defence systems it's already supplied. The head of Ukraine's military intelligence has recently said that the country's troops have almost run out of ammunition and now rely on Western supplies. The Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, says that pouring money and arms into Ukraine will only prolong the conflict.
It prolongates the conflict. It makes Ukrainian soldiers continue fight, and it is very cynical, I should say, because Britain is providing money, not much, but it is providing weapon, and it enforces and encourages Ukrainian army to continue fighting, and no single knowledge about or single idea about the future of Ukraine. What's going to happen after that? It's an interesting question whether UK will be interested after the conflict in rebuilding Ukraine, in continuing owing money to the authorities in Kiev that proved to be very inefficient in building up the country and handling country's economy, once again, in doing something constructive. So I'm afraid the interest will be lost in some sort of it if there will be a failure to continue to make such a project as an anti-Russian to construct out of Ukraine an anti-Russian state, and it will be no more capabilities and no more possibility to do that, then well, probably it will be less interest than now. At the moment, I think that they are preventing any kind of moves that have been born inside Kiev for negotiation. So far, they are continuing to push Ukraine in this along the same way to continue fighting, not to think about the future, as I have said.
Well, the more military aid Ukraine receives from the West, the more world defence giants continue to earn. Here you can see how the share prices of some defence giants have risen as investors anticipate increasing profits. US contractor AeroVironment is expected to be one of the biggest beneficiaries. That's along with European companies Rheinmetall and Leonardo, whose shares have risen by 120 and 67% respectively. Scott Ritter, former Marine Corps intelligence officer, believes that Western weapons supplies won't change the outcome of the conflict.
The situation is deteriorating. The best the supply of Western arms can do is reduce the rate of deterioration. It will never reverse the outcome. No amount of Western weaponry will enable Ukraine to gain the upper hand. All it will do is lengthen the conflict and, more importantly, from the Western perspective, kill more Russians, because that's all this is about. We heard that from Lloyd Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, who said that the goal here is to make Russia pay a cost, to inflict pain on Russia. That means dead Russians. And so that's what the West is trying to accomplish here. And it's very cynical because it's not just Russians that are dying. As we said, for every one Russian that goes down, maybe 20 Ukrainians are going down. So it's about dead Ukrainians as well. And maybe it's time Ukraine wakes up and understands that the West is seeking to extend this conflict, not to help Ukraine, but to hurt Russia. And that's destroying Ukraine in the process.
Meanwhile, a recent intelligence report by both Kiev and Western officials reveals that Ukrainian troops are facing significant losses, which does raise the question as to why Ukraine's commanders still seem reluctant to negotiate with the Russian side. The intelligence officials say that Russia's military maintains the upper hand with 40 times more ammunition and 20 times more artillery than Ukrainian forces. More than 5,600 Ukrainian troops are said to be prisoners of war, and nearly half of them having surrendered at the Azovstal steel factory in Mariupol. Kiev's also believed to be facing a growing desertion problem. Ukraine's top officials, though, still strongly oppose any possibility of surrender. Scott Ritter, again, says the war is becoming unsustainable for Ukraine.
When sides start fighting, the wars, you have ratios of 1 to 1.2, 1 to 1.3 casualties, and you can grind that out, but eventually you're going to get a culminating point where the differential just goes up exponentially. And we're at that point right now. It's no longer for every 1 Russian, there's 3 Ukrainian casualties. It's more like for every 1 Russian, there's 20 Ukrainian casualties. And as the situation deteriorates further on the front, this ratio is just going to continue to spin out of control until it's unsustainable by the Ukrainians. The question is, how much pain is Ukraine able to absorb? Their Minister of Defense said they have 700,000 men under arms right now. So what percentage of that are they willing to sacrifice before it becomes obvious that not only can they not win this conflict, but the longer they continue to resist, the larger the cost in human lives will be, and territorial loss as well.
Russia's foreign minister says that Europe is making all the wrong moves when it comes to negotiations with Moscow.
As always, we are open to dialogue, but it takes 2 to tango, and at the moment, our Western partners are engaged in breakdancing by themselves.
Well, that comment by Sergei Lavrov comes after the Polish president slammed the leaders of France and Germany over their phone calls with the Russian president Vladimir Putin, as RT's Ilya Petrenko explains.
In response to how the Polish president blamed the German and the French leadership for dealing with the Russian government, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused him of growing historical ignorance and also pointed at Poland's own moves against Ukraine's sovereignty.
Perhaps they should be advised to study history, their own history, and those events that underlie Polish history. So far, we see that behind the talk about the inadmissibility of any dialogue with Russia, Polish colleagues are beginning to actively assimilate Ukrainian territory. And then the decisions by President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government on the special rights of the Poles, who are essentially being made equal to the Ukrainians in everything except the right to vote.
Just to give you some background, a little earlier this week, the Polish leader went as far as drawing parallels between Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler, and also pretty much called on the entire international community to forget any ideas of trying to make contact with Russian officials.
I am amazed at all these conversations that Chancellor Scholz and President Macron are having with Putin. These conversations are useless. What are they doing? They legitimize the person responsible for the crimes committed by the Russian army. He is responsible for this. He decided to send troops there. What if someone spoke like this to Adolf Hitler during World War II? Did anyone say that Adolf Hitler must save face? That we should proceed in such a way that it is not humiliating for Adolf Hitler? I have not heard such voices.
In response to my question about these latest comments by Polish President Duda, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reminded how the likes of Germany and France and also other EU countries were always in favor of leaving the door open for talks with Russia, and stressed that Moscow is always ready for talks no matter what. The Russian viewpoint is that diplomacy should always have a chance. However, in the current circumstances, when all Western leaders keep talking about is isolating Russia, this scenario doesn't seem very likely.
Author and journalist Thomas Roper shared his thoughts on the issue.
Poland is one of the real hawks in Europe, which wants to escalate the situation. And having in mind how Poland is now trying, maybe we even can call it annex, parts of Ukraine with a new treaty with Kiev. Poland has an interest in escalating the situation When I put all this together, I have the feeling that Russia doesn't really take Europe, the European Union and the states for serious anymore. They are really just fulfilling commands from the US. And from my feeling, just Russia right now understands and says it quite openly. When there is something to discuss, we have to discuss with the people who make the decisions, and they're not in Brussels, they're in Washington.
Meanwhile, a suspected slip-up in a mainstream news article has shown a local resident of Ukraine's city of Kharkov with a large tattoo of a swastika on his arm. Now, we have asked Reuters to comment on that issue, but we're yet to receive a response. The photo does appear to undermine some Western denials of far-right activity in Ukraine, and some social media users are now questioning how big the issue of nationalists is in the country.
You'd think Western media would have learned to comb through every picture from Ukraine they consider posting to make sure there isn't any swastikas or other Nazi symbolism.
Big swastika tattooed on his arm. Yup, for sure there are no Nazis in Ukraine.
How hard can it be to take a picture of a random person and not have them with a swastika tattoo?
I was 4 times in Donbass, and I have seen all this myself. I was in the headquarters of the Azov battalion. There is no doubt that the country is ruled by people with really Nazi ideology, and this is also in the command of the armed forces. The Western media doesn't want to see it. When you report this is fake news, but I have been there, I've seen it. So we have to ask Western media why they deny that, but it's obvious.
In other news, China's defense minister has slammed his American counterpart following news of the latest US arms package for Taiwan, warning of possible conflict over the island that Beijing claims as its own.
If anyone dares to split Taiwan from China, the Chinese military has no choice but to fight at all costs and take all necessary measures to crush any attempt by Taiwanese separatists to split Taiwan from the motherland. The Chinese military will resolutely safeguard national security and territorial integrity.
Chinese defense minister has also laid out a list of conditions the US must meet for easing tensions, including not interfering in China's internal affairs or harming China's interests. China and Taiwan split during a civil war in 1949, and the country has been following the one China policy ever since then. The latest arms package sees the US provide parts for Taiwanese naval ships at an estimated cost of $120 million. Washington has been known as Taiwan's main ally in its confrontation with China for some time. Well, earlier we spoke to Nelson Wong, Vice Chairman of the Shanghai Center for International Studies and a Valdai Club expert, and he says that the US is using Taiwan as its trump card against China.
I think the U.S. government has always been using the Taiwan issue as its one of the measures to contain China in its relations with China. Taiwan, the Taiwan card, is always in their hands to play with from time to time. And I think this is, they believe this is a time to create trouble for China, to mess around with the internal affairs of China. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new to China, but if they play it too hard, I think the Chinese government will take some actions. And in terms of any upcoming threat to separate Taiwan from the motherland, then the Chinese government is going to take actions. An announcement has already been made. What China has been expressing itself quite clearly over the years, over the decades, is that this is an internal affairs of China. And the Taiwan issue is a leftover issue from China's civil war way back when. And the international community has all recognized the one China policy, even including the United States government. It has also recognized the one China policy. So based on this understanding, China, its government has always been trying to seek a national reunification through peaceful talks.
And moving on now, Algeria has frozen foreign trade in products and services with Spain. That's amid an escalating dispute over the status of Western Sahara. That announcement, which was on Thursday, came a day after the African nation suspended a 20-year-old friendship treaty with Spain, which committed the countries to jointly controlling the mutual flow of migrants. The EU's called on Algeria to reverse that decision, with Brussels urging dialogue to resolve the dispute. Meanwhile, the Spanish foreign minister has called for mutual respect between all countries in the region.
Sovereign equality of states, non-interference in internal affairs, mutual respect, mutual benefit for our two countries. It is under these premises that we want to have the best relationship as possible with Algeria, like we have with the rest of our neighbours.
Spain was the former colonial power in Western Sahara until the area was annexed by Morocco back in 1975. Since then, Algeria and neighbouring Morocco have had tense discussions over the status of the region. The diplomatic standoff continued until 1991, when the two countries reached an agreement for a referendum to be held and the implementation of a UN-backed buffer zone. But since that agreement, Morocco has controlled the majority of Western Sahara. Spain backs Morocco's autonomy plan for the region, while Algeria opposes it and says the region should be completely independent. Alian Kentoui, an official for a Western Sahara independence movement, has accused Morocco of replacing Spain as the colonial power in the region.
Spain has taken a position siding completely with the aggression. Spain was the colonial power, and everybody was expecting Spain to be an honest broker and to help the solution, because Spain in the end is the responsible of the entire tragedy. Morocco definitely Morocco has substituted an European colonialism, and they are behaving as a classic colonial power. They have invaded Western Sahara since 1975. A war has been going on for many years between the Sahrawi people defending their rights to be free and independent, and the aggression of Morocco. On the other hand, it's a tradition of supporting the liberation movement during the entire history of the struggle of liberation in Africa. They are taking this position because of their own history. Algeria is a product of a liberation movement.
And finally, cash-strapped Pakistan is counting on Chinese loans to help raise its foreign reserve within the next few days.
I assure you that by Tuesday next week, the issue of foreign exchange reserves will be resolved, as the expected $2.4 billion will be transferred from China. Our forex reserves will reach $12 billion.
Now, the country is facing a balance of payment crisis, and that's caused by a growing decline in foreign currency reserves, as well as a widening account and fiscal deficit. That's along with record two-year high inflation, which is mainly affecting prices of food and fuel. Pakistan's also continuing negotiations with the International Monetary Fund as the government hopes to resume a payment on a $6 billion package loan agreed back in 2019, and that was suspended due to non-compliance with certain conditions. The current authorities blame ousted Prime Minister Imran Khan for the crisis, which is an accusation, of course, he's always denied. If the IMF agrees to review its decision, Pakistan will then receive $900 million, which will help access other sources of external financing. Pakistan's already fulfilled one of the fund's requirements by removing fuel subsidies, a move that's led to a 40% growth in prices. The government also intends to raise taxes on the rich, cut tax leaks, privatise government assets and ban officials from buying cars. That's as it continues to struggle with spiralling costs and energy shortfalls. We spoke to a professor and research fellow who believes that IMF negotiations have been severely hampered by difficulties in relations with the United States.
It is very, difficult for the current government to overcome these crises, which is quite disturbing for the IMF counterparts. This is why we are not reaching to a deal. US, contributes at least $117 billion to the IMF quota. And if Pakistan has to, make a deal with the IMF, it is very important for Pakistan to have consent from the United States and have also the confidence that we are going to do the job that is expected from us. But so far, the problem that arose during the last days of Khan's administration, our bilateral relations with the United States got really disturbed. In the international monetary system, Pakistan is dependent upon the flexible exchange rate international market in which it has, just like any other country, pegged its currency with the US dollar. And any fluctuation in the value of the US dollar is going to affect the entire currencies around the world. And Pakistan has to, make reserves of the US dollars. And if there is no macro level economic policies that is going to affect positively the Pakistani economy, Pakistan reserves are going to get down.
Well, that's a wrap for now. Whatever you're up to this weekend, I hope you're having a good one. My name's Peter Scott, and thank you very much for watching.